Hey guys, Tim Glomb here for Thinking Caps. I'm the VP of Content at Cheetah Digital, and I am joined, as always, by our CMO, Richard Jones. And today, we are excited to bring you Chris Muscutt. Chris leads the marketing technology at Shell, and they're doing some great things. They've been a longtime client. They use a lot of experiences. They do some really innovative things with our technology. Chris, how are you today? Thanks for joining us.
I'm good, and thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the hat.
Oh, yeah. Great hat. This is the first time I've seen anybody with a Cheetah Digital hat. This is going to be the perfect Thinking Caps episode. Well, Chris, why don't we kick off? Let's jump right in. But why don't you first tell us a little bit about your role at Shell, how you got there, and what your role's all about inside the Shell company.
Yeah, no, of course. It's interesting. I started off, believe it or not, in air traffic control. That was where I really started. So away from Shell, on my graduate placement, it was an engineer doing air traffic control, setting out how to track aircraft. And it's amazing that as you fast forward almost 20 years, I've gone from where I needed to identify flying things, classify them and track them through certain areas with IDs that might be visible and might not. And now I've come into a marketing world, and actually it is a very similar technology basis. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, my kind of career path into marketing wasn't probably a traditional marketing background. As I say, I came from a defense industry doing that kind of thing. Then took a role within Ernst & Young, where I started to move into more IT security and IT systems. And then I came into Shell, where I joined their marketing team as a BA, and then I've slowly worked myself up, being like the expert on the marketing technology stack, where I brought in most of the website tracking, marketing tools, emails. I've gone through all the RFP stages, then onboarded them into platforms, into various departments.
So I got a question for you, Chris. Scott Brinker's marketing technology landscape came out a week or two ago, and it had grown 13% year over year in terms of the number of vendors. So there's now over 8,000 marketing technology vendors. Do you, heading up marketing technology at a company the size of Shell, do you see that volume of vendors as just an absolute nightmare, or do you see it as an opportunity?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. It's quite difficult because when you've got lots of platforms, you always see the innovation from different platforms, and you always hear this rule about the 80-20. You want 100% of the functionality, and you sometimes spend so long trying to do that. But in reality, you only use 20% of the functionality once. And I think those 8,000 probably fall into I wanted something for a specific reason, and then I didn't use it again. So, I think in terms of the innovation, yes, that's probably why we have the 8,000, but actually in practicality, trying to actually serve a consumer across digital with that number of platforms, but it becomes really, really tricky. So I think, opportunity, but hindrance, and there's a careful balance between it. And
wow.
I found myself in between a lot of arguments about why don't you use this one and not all of those 10. It's always hard.
Well, let me ask you. Shell is a massive company. What's your footprint for Shell? A company like Shell. It's global, but how large of a company? Just give our viewers some kind of scale of what.
Yeah. So when you normally see Shell as the fuel courts, so the gas station. In terms of that footprint, we have over 46,000 sites. So, in terms of stores, that's the biggest retailer in the world. But that's only a part of Shell. Obviously, when you look at things like aviation, marine, all the shipping kind of logistics, there's the chemical side of things, the lubricants, and then you've got the upstream part of the business, which is where we're extracting new energy and looking at new ways to get renewable sources. So it's big. The retail business is in 86 countries.
Wow. I'm driving cross country. I'm coming to you safely from a hotel in Atlanta today, and I've certainly been putting Shell into my truck as I cruise that. So thanks for giving us the scale. 46,000 gas stations. That's massive. What are your biggest challenges in the Martech space? Leading the Martech space inside of Shell. What are the biggest hurdles there?
Um, Certainly this challenge of different systems is definitely one. Trying to get some consistency. We've kind of talked about core rocks, trying to have the technology that tracks customers, across channels, trying to default with core rocks. So we don't get into the conversation on every campaign you've got to do X, Y, and Z. We know those foundation parts. So that's one bit that we've tried to help ourselves with. But I think the other part is, very often, and one of the reasons that Cheetah Experience came up in Shell was this challenge that we had, that every time we had a new campaign, it often came with new technology, because whether it was a particular agency, whether it was an individual, they'd searched on Google, found something, and that brought in the next technology stack. And we're finding that process of trying to get a campaign, I mean, let's just say a very, very simple campaign has some sort of form capture. Going through that and making sure that we've gone through the privacy controls, the brand controls, the visual identity, the online standards, all of that was just taking so long, and it was a repetitive step each time. And I think that's the kind of challenge, is how can we streamline it so it's not so painful to do things new and creative, but at the same time give those markets the flexibility to do something new. And sometimes this isn't about a new technology, it's trying to tweak and shape a journey correctly. And I think that's been the challenge, is trying to make sure that especially some of the local countries, they have that freedom to work with an agency, come up with a good idea, but they kind of reuse what we've already done, and they don't start from scratch each time. That's been one of the challenges that we've been trying to get buy-in.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Chris, because we've had a number of folks that have come on to this podcast and have been talking about how, with COVID-19, it's really a massive digital acceleration, that's happened for some of the customers, some of the industries in weeks, many years worth of digital acceleration has literally happened overnight. Now, given the sheer breadth, size, and scale at Shell, moving, at light speed must be very, very complex. But at the same time, Shell's having to, innovate with the situation that we're in. And very recently, you announced a new service, Shell Grocery to Go. So give us a little bit of info about that.
Yeah, so at the start of this, I was watching the news and hearing about people trying to get access to essential food and things like that, and trying to reduce the risk. And it was literally talking around the fact that these companies that used to deliver food for hotels and businesses, their business is gone. So I phoned one of them up just to find out whether we could work together. And I came up with a concept. It was called Food to Boot, but it's now been rebranded Shell Grocery to Go. But the idea was can we deliver an online ordering system where someone comes to our station and receives a package of food in the boot without getting out? So there's no chance of contracting, because there is no physical contact. And could we do that at scale? So yeah, I kind of went through the initial hurdles. It was a very unique pitch, but using the technologies that we already had, I'm quite pleased to say that within 2 weeks we actually had a working order site and a live pilot of the whole thing, which is absolutely amazing. In Shell's terms, to do something that quickly, was breathtaking. We had some really good support, but it shows it is possible. I think the fact that it was, this very strange crisis gave us a little bit more, room to operate, in a crisis and a setup. But yeah, I think it was a good success, and it's definitely, kind of a textbook learnings of how we can move quickly without jeopardizing any of the controls that are required to make things safe and compliant.
Wow, and Cheetah Digital was a part of that, right? We had a small part of that?
Yeah, and I mean, again, the ordering part of this was key, but we'd already gone through all of the data privacy and security parts for the Cheetah Experience platform. So it did enable us just to quickly reuse that. So yeah, I mean, that was the key to this. I mean, the lessons to share with some of the other businesses, they were like, how did you do that? And I said, well, we used the platform that already existed today.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, as I say, I think it certainly turned some heads, and people have been asking me after that, how they can do a similar thing elsewhere.
That's great. And we have another client on another podcast that did the same thing in COVID. They used the Cheetah Experience platform as an RSVP to generate real-time sales when you couldn't go into a store in groups. So you should check that out on a previous podcast with Bowtech. Let me ask you though, just in general, I mean, we've had people on the podcast that have, gotten hit pretty hard from COVID, right? Hotels, travel industry, things like that. And then others that are booming, like, grocery. Andres at the Sailing Group has talked about how groceries exploded and delivery. How overall, how has COVID kind of impacted, and where do you guys stand at Shell from a high level perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of the three bands here. Certainly from a staff's perspective, I think all companies have had the same thing. It's a real change. We're used to working, talking with colleagues around the world over, we use Skype, but it's actually now the fact that that's a normal way of doing business, and having to make slight changes for that. And I think it was hard for some at first, but I think actually people have changed now. It'll be interesting, it's a shame that you can't benchmark to see productivity, but I think the fact that people can switch off and start working on things where they can isolate themselves, excuse the pun, but I think that's actually helping, but then when you're talking about working with customers, there is now a slight more distancing with the customers. Obviously, I think throughout, the globe, this customer support bit and how customers get access to support quickly, that's a challenge, because obviously workforce has dropped down a little bit, but the customer inquiries have increased a lot more, and that's probably the same for B2B as well. And I think then, actually coming up with the business models, there are opportunities for changing the business quickly. And I think this is where, the groceries, or even, corner shops doing home delivery and stuff like that, it's shown a massive boom in the opportunities. I think it's that latter part, because of the size of us, it's a bit hard to look at too many of those niche markets. I'd love to, and I'm constantly told by my boss that we can't explore them all. But I think that's where the exciting place is how can we actually serve customers' needs as they change, and will those changes stay changed after this? A lot of people are now happy to order. I mean, my mum would never order food online. She's done it once and realized, oh wow, I can actually look and find what I want rather than getting it impulse buy. So will she stay doing that after? So I think there is these kind of subtle changes. I think the bits that are really interesting is stuff that we didn't think would change or didn't think could change. I mean, if you think about buying a car, for instance, the garage is now doing, they drive the car, they clean it and leave it outside your house, then go away, then come back. And it's just those kind of models. And it is consumer convenience that would have never happened before, because businesses could have just not needed to do it. Or so I say that they wouldn't have wanted to change their business model in that way. But now consumers are using it, they're probably going to say, I prefer that. That was a better way of doing business. And I think that's going to be the interesting change.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We had the chief customer officer of Glomb Brands was on the podcast recently, and a massive multi-billion-dollar restaurant chain, and he was sort of saying that when you actually look at the data around who's coming in and ordering the curbside delivery or coming into the online channels, it wasn't actually the same demographics that were coming into the restaurant on Friday night with the family. So they'd opened up their service to this whole sort of new segment of customers. And so the challenge now, as restaurants are opening up, is how do you tempt back the existing, the original customer base, whilst keeping all of this new online audience that you had, and try and kind of get the folks that are doing online to come into the restaurant as well, because that's the most valuable customer.
Yeah.
So, things won't return totally to normal, but there's opportunities, I think, for some businesses in that whole process.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I think the restaurant part is going to be really interesting. I was curious if restaurants would start doing kind of meal kits to try and get people still having their favorite meal, but still being able to do it. And I think in the UK, it's not really happened in that way. We've seen like the delivery part booming, but some of the big restaurants just have stayed shut, which it'll be interesting to see what they do over the next couple of months.
Now, I've got a question for you, which is very much focused on the probably one of the hardest parts of running marketing technology. And I've heard other folks tell me over the years that actually implementing technology isn't really the hard part. The hard part is changing culture. So how do you approach, when you're putting in your projects and leading change, kind of winning hearts and minds around the projects that you deploy?
Yeah, I think this touches on the 8,000 tech that you actually mentioned before. There's a lot of people that have tried a particular platform. That's their comfort base, and change from that is difficult. And I always find that, trying to understand the needs, trying to actually make sure that they're bought in and trying to share what they want. That's the most important thing. If you go to someone and say, I've got the solution to the problem that you haven't told me, no one's ever going to take it. Yeah, so I think it's working on that. But I always find that certainly, within Shell, I've always found that, trying to co-develop, the problem statement, but then everyone always likes to see something really early on. So trying to put, something together as quickly as possible to take them through it, get their steer on, what they think needs to be able to change. So make sure that, you are co-combining, no ideas, to come up with a solution. But doing that on a pilot basis always seems to work. Whereas if something is, a repeatable thing, like with Cheetah Experience, it's then showcasing, what a different country or business did with the tool and what the success was. So we've kind of created a portal where we've documented what was the audience, what did it do, what were the successes, what were the failures. Perhaps they marketed on Facebook and it should have been YouTube, whatever. But doing that's the tangible bit. So I think it's the belief that something is more than an idea is one part, and then also trying to actually help someone along the journey so they're not left alone to pick up the pieces, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think they're the two bits that I find seem to work.
Very sound advice. Very sound advice.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you're the head of marketing technology at Shell, massive corporation, global. You even said 46,000 retail locations from a gasoline perspective. And you talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about how you actually use Cheetah Experiences, specifically during COVID and your grocery program. But I have to ask you, what was it that attracted you to Cheetah Experiences? What was the value that you saw? And what was the future that you saw when you looked at the platform and why you brought it in-house to Shell?
I touched on a bit of it earlier, just around the fact that we had, so at the time I was looking after our licensee business, which is around 56 countries. And we were having this common problem that every week someone was saying, I want to do a new campaign, I want to use this platform. And it was just common problems, but with different solutions each time. So it was during this time of where I had probably the biggest peak. It's probably one of the summers where I was dealing with the same thing every single day with the marketing team. And I was working with it was Cadbury's actually. We went to a conference together, and basically we saw your platform, and we kind of both asked for a run through. And what I saw was the opportunity to start saying, right, we'll build templates, that are brand approved, document them and allow markets just to pick them and go really quickly with them. Whereas in the past, what they'll do is they'll come up and they'd have to go through, it was probably about a 2-month process just to get the approvals before you could even start doing something. So the sell was really the fact that we're coming up with a solution that templates campaigns, the interactive part of a campaign, in a repeatable way, which can be done in weeks. And the sell was really the fact that each market could perhaps contribute to building one campaign in the year. But if they've got, a group of countries that they're working together, they can share the campaigns from the other countries. So maybe they could have one campaign every couple of weeks, but only contribute one. They're just localizing it. So that was kind of sell, and we brought it in and we tested it with a number of markets, and it did work. People were talking to each other, they were sharing ideas and sharing campaigns. So that's kind of the story of how it got there and how it went forward. I think Cadbury's story was the same. I lost contact after we actually signed up to Cheetah Experience, but their problem statement was similar.
So, Chris, one of the things around kind of digital acceleration that we've seen over the recent sort of weeks and months, and perhaps 18 months or so before kind of COVID-19 took hold, is that we have seen many marketers want to establish direct connections with consumers for a whole variety of different reasons. Everything from building the marketing database to doing research to understanding customers a little bit better so they can do personalized outreach. Now, obviously, I know Shell, with the wide sort of deployment of Cheetah Experiences in many different kind of markets, have done lots and lots of different campaigns to can make those direct connections to consumers. And I wondered if you'd just do us a favor and just talk about one or two campaigns of kind of how you've actually done that, just to give some practical examples to our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a couple of the big ones. We had a new loyalty program in Argentina. So they were all about reach. How can they get new customers to understand about products and services? So their one was fantastic in the fact that from very little marketing spend, they could actually attract a huge volume of people to come through and sign up to communication preferences. And I think that was a balance between the experience was right and shareable, so they didn't always have to rely on paid media, and also the fact that it was a bit of fun, it was relevant, and people liked interacting with that particular campaign. So I think that was really good, in terms of sales uplift and contactable customers. I think the other one that I was really impressed with, just because of the time frame, in Malaysia they did a scratch and win, so they reused the functionality that we'd already built, and they just wanted, again, contactable customers. So they did a scratch and win where you spent a certain amount, and then you got a scratch card with a code on it. You had to go to the website and sign up, and in order to be entered, you basically have to give some contact information. I mean, for them, I think they had something like 250,000 in a couple of weeks. It was amazing numbers, but I think they are two successes on the fact that with very little, investment in setting up new technology, because they reused something, they went live very quickly and got a really sizable, customer base.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Fantastic. So I just wanted to finish off, the one last question. I know you're a busy man, and we really appreciate you coming onto the show. But so maybe this is a bit of advice for folks, in the deploying marketing technology or thinking about marketing technology. We often meet many marketers that will interact with events or that come through our digital channels or whatever, that have got an idea, something sparked, and they want to actually implement a new technology project, but they actually struggle with getting the alignment and the budget sign off, particularly if they're perhaps haven't done it before, or a more junior person, and trying to navigate how that whole process works of getting buy-in and getting projects off the ground. What tips can you provide our listeners on how to make the business case?
I guess you've got two aspects to that. One is from getting, the project team bought in. And I often think that seeing and believing and getting involved with understanding and supporting tech side of things, that's one side, certainly for me. When you go up the chain, trying to get that buy-in that it is as simple or straightforward as perhaps you're trying to say, or perhaps it's not, perhaps it is complicated, but it's putting that story really, really simply. I think I've seen lots of proposals where the technology comes in really early on, and obviously people switch off. They perhaps don't want that part. So it's almost about trying to get this context diagram. So I often do a context diagram at the beginning before I write anything, just to try and get 3 or 4 core blocks. And these core rocks that I spoke about earlier, how can you make sure that you can articulate that part of the business case, just to 2 or 3 things, and then remove everything else? Because as soon as you get through to the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, people switch off. So I think that's one tactic that I like to do, and that comes from my business analyst days, this kind of idea of a contextual part. I also like the Amazon story of just trying to write, what would a success look like? Can you do this press release style thing where you're saying, this is what I achieved? Can you start with that? Because certainly the senior people, that's what they want to know. So if you can start off with that and work backwards, that certainly gives you a bit more of a better footing on what this document business case is going to look like. And then finally, what I always like to do is have like a back pocket card where I'll put a very simple prototype together that's something you can pull out and say, well, okay, perhaps you didn't get it. Why don't you try it? And they're like, well, what do you mean try it? Well, I'll put it together. You know, this is what it's like. It doesn't all work. It's near enough there. And certainly for some of the stakeholders, they prefer to react in that way and actually start asking questions. And something that perhaps I'm not brilliant at, I'm trying to get a lot better, is trying to make sure you've got that time for that one-to-one before, you know, those big meetings, and actually trying to make sure that you sit down, make sure that perhaps they've got some of the insights, so it's not all brand new to them, you know, in that big show and tell meeting. So I think they're probably the key tips for it. And I guess the other part to this is to try and get all of the legal T's and C's answered before they ask the questions. So cookies, data privacy, brand, all of those things, because they always come up. And if you cover those really early on, it just means that they're out the way and you don't have to rush and retrofit things.
Fantastic advice. I think for anybody trying to get marketing technology projects off the ground. I mean, I think as we move forward over the next year or so, those 8,000 bits of marketing technology in Scott Brinker's technology landscape are going to get implemented by a lot of marketers. So some really good advice there. Thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the Thinking Caps.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks. I think you get the award for the best cap yet. I don't even have one of those, so kudos to you.
Yeah,
cool.
Well, thank you for it.
Well, guys, we'll bring Chris back again later. They've been a great client. They've been using Cheetah Experiences for quite a while. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can always find more episodes. Go back and find other episodes and subscribe to our new episodes on Apple iTunes. Thinking Caps. We are out, guys. Good talking to you.